Hello, I'm going to be talking to you about what I see as nothing more nor less than a full-scale war against children. But before I do that, I'm going to say please click the like button. It does help a little bit to spread the video, to put it in the algorithm, so it's useful to me. So if you want to be useful to me, then yeah, click that like button. Now, let's get on with a really depressing little article I'm reading here in the Telegraph. It says here, Scottish 4-year-olds can change gender at school without parents' consent. And this is called inclusivity. Well, I'll tell you who isn't included. The parents aren't. New inclusivity guidelines say teachers should not question pupils, but instead ask them for their new name and pronouns. And then it carries on. Children as young as 4 will be able to change their name and gender at school without their parents' consent under new LGBT inclusivity guidelines drawn up by the Scottish Government. And it's a 70-page document for them to do this. It's all issued to all schools north of the border, that is within Scotland, and it calls on teachers not to question pupils if they say they want to transition to live as a boy or a girl, and to instead ask them for their new name or pronoun. In other words, to encourage them in the delusion. Now, when you've got a small child, and they say as young as 4, because this means anyone from the beginning of school, which in Britain starts at 4. And so, when a child starts to go along a certain path and is encouraged on that path, it tends to stay on that path. So it looks like these children are being shepherded into a certain attitude, right? Scotland's schools have also been told that trans pupils should be able to use whatever lavatory or changing room they choose. What could possibly go wrong? To develop gender-neutral uniform options, well, I'm actually all for that. When my kids were at school, I did say maybe all of the children should be wearing like tracksuits. I said that would probably be the best. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but that was not intended to be a gender thing. It was just to be a uniform, because, they have uniforms in British schools. And to include transgender characters and role models in reading materials. In other words, propaganda. Campaigners, that's one word. Another word could be sensible people. Campaigners claimed a dangerous ideology was being pushed into schools and warned that children who displayed normal behaviour, such as playing with toys stereotypically associated with the other sex, risked being wrongly labelled as transgender. And that's true. I had 3 boys. My first was always, when he got Lego, he would take the little figures apart and turn the arms and the legs into levers for the fantastic machines he made. And you might have said, oh yeah, that's a typical man, or typical boy rather, more interested in things than people. The second child I had, who was also a boy, would line up the Lego pieces and then, on the long strip, and then he'd sort of move them around and make up stories, sometimes of such complexity. I went past his room once and I was sure he had a friend there, because he was having such an animated conversation with these Lego pieces. And you see, they were 2 completely different types of people, that's all. They've both grown into what I would call normal men. Sort of well-adjusted, heterosexual, married men with female wives. Okay, I know that this doesn't always happen, but I'm saying that is the majority or it should be the majority, or the human race would not have survived as long as it has. Yeah, props to people who have different problems and manage to get through it. You know, that's a different conversation. But anyway, yeah, I was just pointing out that I have 3 sons, and 2 of them, the first and the second, could not have been more different. And yes, indeed, that second one might have been encouraged by some teacher to think that maybe he was a girl after all, and then got himself really confused. This is really, really worrying, said Marion Calder, co-director of the For Women Scotland campaign group. I've never heard of them, but now I have. The bottom line is that this is a dangerous ideology that the Scottish government is pushing. It shows a failure in safeguarding and a removal of parental rights. Yeah, well, spot on there, Miss Calder. It used to be commonly understood that children should be able to play and experiment with gender roles, with clothing, their likes and dislikes. And that's true. You know, even if my second child had turned out to be more interested in people all his life, and even turned out to be gay, he would still have been non-medicalized because of the time he was born. Now, as she said, these children are now being encouraged onto a medical pathway, potentially for the rest of their lives. Yes, because once you start with this, you can't stop. You have to keep on taking drugs, hormones, and various medications to maintain the image of the gender you think you are. The guidance also includes a recommended reading list for primary schools designed to promote trans inclusivity. One book included tells a story about a blue crayon which suffers an identity crisis because it was mistakenly labelled as red. Now, I don't know that story, but from that description, it looks like there's a blue crayon which had a label on it which said it was red, but it was still a blue crayon. Now, if that blue crayon had said, look, it says I'm blue, but I'm really red, that crayon would have been wrong. And it might have painted itself red to resemble a red crayon, but when you tried to write with it, very quickly it would become apparent that that was a blue crayon. At least that's the way I look at it based on what I've seen of the story, which admittedly here is only 2 lines. Okay, it says here, studies have shown that the vast majority of such children, I assume children who think they're the other gender, or sex rather, such children revert to their biological sex identity if untreated, although the quality and methodology of some of the research has been disputed. Yes, well, we don't really know that much about it. Scottish teachers are urged not to say it's just a phase if a child states they are transgender, and to instead be affirming of how they feel. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this. You see, this war against children, I don't know whether it's something to do with the fact that the world is becoming overpopulated and there is some mechanism in nature whereby when that happens, we start tearing ourselves apart as a species. It started, this war against children started in China, didn't it? With the one-child policy. Apparently it was enforced so stringently that full-term babies born at full term were terminated in front of their grieving mothers. That was the Chinese war against children. And now they, of course, regret it, but they've done too much damage to themselves. And when we heard about that, we all thought, oh, how terrible. But, well, it's a faraway country, so it's not going to affect us. But you see, it did affect us, and it probably did so through Dawkins' theory of a virus of the mind. Once these things get abroad, they start traveling. And because we're part of mankind, we have been affected by it as well. So I understand that in the USA right now, there are political discussions about the termination of full-term babies. Termination being a clinical word for murder in this case. Now, look, I am not against abortion, especially within the first few weeks. You know, I mean, I know we've got to think about it carefully, but I am not automatically, I don't think, oh, this is a full-scale murder of little babies when somebody aborts an 8-week fetus. No, I don't think that. I think that there are situations where an abortion is reasonable. However, I do believe it's something we have to really think very carefully about, that we have to have serious discussions about. And there aren't any serious discussions. You've either got the Ben Shapiro, they're murdering little babies on one side, and on the other side, you've got Democrat politicians saying nobody's a baby, well, you can kill anything up to 5 years old, basically. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit. However, it does seem that the left is determined to destroy children. They are the ones, after all, who are now trying to keep the lockdown going on for much longer than necessary, during which time children are stuck at home, get a crippled education and crippled social development. Then there's the transgender fashion du jour, which I was just talking about, which involves actually the sterilization of our children. So if they actually do make it to adulthood without topping themselves first, which is something else that happens rather a lot, if they do make it to adulthood through the forest of depression and self-loathing, the educational system is determined to foist onto them, then at least they'll never be able to reproduce. So we're encouraging them to become transgender, which means the removal of their generative organs. Aren't we? Job done. No more babies. And, as I said, a good candidate for suicide when they realise what's happened to them. Now, in general, I suppose you're thinking all I'm talking about is white children. But I'm not. Okay. Making white boys apologise for being white and privileged and ruining their confidence, yeah, that might be an obvious sally in the war against children, but it's by no means the only strategy. For instance, how about the black kids? Are they doing any better out of all of this with the myths that they're taught that melanin makes them superior somehow, or that Europeans have and always will oppress them? Well, in both the UK and the USA, more black kids are killed in violent incidents by other black kids than any other group. Is that doing them any good? I would say not, especially in the USA. There's an encouragement, and it's happening here too, of single parents, which means that you get semi-literate, resentful underclass of black people that doesn't seem to be able to do anything very much but, well, have violent incidents. The orgy of looting, which we all saw in the USA recently, showed a group of people who not only do not appear to have any moral compass left, but are so consumed by the passion of the moment that it doesn't seem to occur to them that when they destroy that shop, that's the last local shop they'll have in their neighbourhood ever again. Now, is this just a disease of the West? Well, no, it isn't. I've told you about the Chinese. I think they probably started it. But then the Middle East and Pakistan, for instance, They're supposed to be, religious Muslims. They seem to hate their kids almost more than anyone else. How about them radicalizing their kids until they can't live normal lives anymore? How about constant wars and disruption? How about sending these children to blow themselves up or lauding the ones that do, making heroes of them, using kids as shields and then over here, we Europeans are bringing in people who bully our own children to the extent that Swedish blondes are now dyeing their hair black so they won't be pestered in the street and they can't go out anymore in places where in previous years they wouldn't have even thought twice about it. So yeah, let's get to Britain. We have the slave gangs. I keep talking about those. We say incidents like Rotherham, but the fact is it's going on all over the country to the dead silence of the media, and we mustn't talk about that. In fact, the only countries I can think of that seem to have some respect for their children as children are Hungary, Poland, and Israel. And of course, all three of those countries get universal disapproval from all the wokerati round here. And when somebody round here tries to bring children up properly and educate them properly, like Catherine Birbalsingh, for instance, the famous educator, well, nobody likes her except for the parents and the children, maybe. Well, anyway, that's it. There seems to be a general feeling that we have to destroy children. Well, I don't have that feeling. I'm sure many people watching this video don't. But it's like holding back a tide and talking about it. I had a friend, I think, must have blocked me because I haven't heard from him on Facebook. And I was talking about men coming into women's changing rooms and toilets. And I said, would you like it if your daughter were in a changing room and some transgender man came in and started, well, acting badly in some way in the changing room? I'm not talking, by the way, I have to keep saying this. I'm not talking about men who are really transgender. I'm talking about the ones who are play acting. And he said, no, there's nothing wrong with that. I wouldn't object to it at all. And that I thought, well, I don't know who's madder, him for speaking like that and thinking like that, or me for even being concerned about it. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.